They told him his brother had left him nothing but rot, but the dog heard something breathing beneath the floorboards before anyone else believed there was a reason to stay. The rain came down over eastern Pennsylvania with the slow patience of a memory that refused to leave, tapping against the roof of Ethan Calloway's old pickup as it sat beneath the dim lights of a highway rest area outside Scranton. The truck had once been blue, but years of road salt and winter wind had faded it into a tired gray. Inside, the air smelled of damp canvas, motor oil, and the last of the gas station coffee cooling in a paper cup near the gearshift. Ethan sat behind the wheel with both hands resting loosely in his lap, not sleeping, not fully awake, his eyes fixed on the dark glass where his own reflection looked older than 40. He was a white male veteran with a square, weathered face, short dark brown hair touched with gray at the temples, light stubble along his jaw, and broad shoulders folded beneath a worn olive field jacket over a faded plaid shirt. There was strength in him, but it had gone quiet, the kind of strength that no longer tried to prove itself to anyone. Beside him, Briggs lay across the passenger seat, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat, a strong chest, upright ears, and alert amber eyes that seemed to catch every movement in the rain. His dark working harness was still on, because Ethan had learned long ago that Briggs rested better when he felt ready for whatever the night might ask of him. They had been living from one parking lot to the next for nearly 3 months, drifting between odd repair jobs, church suppers, and county offices where forms always seemed to ask for an address before offering help to a man who no longer had one. Ethan had once been a combat engineer, a man trained to shore up weak bridges, clear blocked roads, and make broken places passable again. It was almost funny, in a sad sort of way, that he could rebuild a washed-out culvert in freezing rain but could not rebuild the life waiting for him after he came home. He had stopped calling people. Stopped answering old numbers. Stopped explaining why silence sometimes felt easier than being known. The phone buzzed against the dashboard at 9:43 that night, its cracked screen lighting the cab in pale blue. Briggs lifted his head before Ethan touched it, ears pricking forward, eyes narrowing with that focused look he had whenever the world shifted by one invisible inch. The number was local to a town Ethan had not seen in nearly 10 years. Black Hollow, Pennsylvania. His thumb hovered over the screen. For a moment, he considered letting it fade into missed calls and morning regret. Then Briggs gave a soft huff, low and deliberate. Ethan answered. The woman on the line introduced herself as Margaret Hale, attorney at law, her voice steady and old-fashioned, with the careful kindness of someone who had delivered difficult news more than once, and still believed it deserved gentleness. Mr. Calloway, she said, I am sorry to tell you that your brother, Noah Calloway, passed away last Thursday. The rain seemed to grow louder. Ethan did not speak. He saw Noah not as an older man, not as someone who could pass away alone, but as a boy with scraped knees standing beside him at Black Hollow Creek, both of them laughing while their father showed them how to set a fishing line beneath the old sycamore. 10 years of silence folded in on itself inside the truck. Margaret waited, then continued. He left instructions for you. There is a property. A cabin on Black Hollow Ridge. Ethan closed his eyes. The cabin. That leaning, smoke-scented place where summer nights had once smelled of pine needles, canned peaches, and their mothers' wool blankets stored in cedar trunks. There must be a mistake, Ethan said, his voice rough from disuse. Noah and I were not exactly close. Margaret's answer came softly. He knew that. He left it anyway. Briggs sat up fully now, facing the windshield, though there was nothing beyond it but rain, asphalt, and the glow of vending machines under the shelter. Ethan swallowed hard. What kind of shape is it in? There was a pause long enough to be honest. Not good, Margaret said. The roof needs work. The porch has shifted. The county assessor called it uninhabitable last year. Ethan almost laughed, but it came out only as breath. A homeless man inheriting a house no one could live in. Noah would have understood the cruel poetry of that, if they had still been the kind of brothers who shared jokes instead of years of silence. Margaret gave him the address, then added that a key would be waiting under the loose stone near the back step, exactly where it had been when the boys were young. That detail did what the news had not. It reached past Ethan's guarded heart and touched the place where childhood was still intact. After the call ended, Ethan sat unmoving while rain traced crooked lines down the windshield. Briggs leaned over and pressed his nose against Ethan's sleeve. The dog did not whine. He simply stayed there, warm and certain, as if reminding him that grief did not need words to be real. By dawn, they were driving west through the low Appalachian hills, the old pickup climbing narrow roads lined with wet hemlock, bare oak, and stone walls furred with moss. Fog lay in the hollows like breath held close to the earth. Black Hollow Ridge appeared just after sunrise, a dark shoulder of land rising beyond the town's last mailbox. The cabin stood at the end of a rutted lane, half hidden by laurel and winter-dead grass. Its roof sagged in the middle, the porch leaned to one side, and one front window was cracked from corner to corner. Vines had climbed the chimney. Rainwater dripped steadily from a gutter that had pulled loose years ago. Ethan parked beneath a white oak and let the engine tick itself quiet. For a long moment, he only looked. The place seemed less abandoned than exhausted. Briggs jumped down first, paused landing in the mud with purpose. He did not run to the door. He circled the yard once, nose low, tail still, then stopped near the back of the cabin where the ground dipped toward an old stone well. His ears stood straight. Ethan stepped out into the cold morning air, the key already in his hand, though he had not yet opened the door. The cabin creaked softly in the wind, and somewhere beneath that sound, beneath the rain and the trees and the long silence between brothers, Briggs began to listen. Ethan stood beside the truck with the key in his palm while the cabin watched him through its cracked front window like an old face trying to remember his name. Morning rain had softened into mist, and Black Hollow Ridge lay wrapped in gray-green silence. The white oak behind the cabin spread its bare branches over the yard, its roots rising through the wet ground like the knuckles of a hand that had held on too long. Briggs remained near the back corner of the cabin, nose low, ears high, his black and tan coat darkened slightly by the damp air, his harness strap catching drops of water that shone like tiny beads of glass. Ethan called him once softly. "Briggs." The German shepherd looked back, but he did not come. He turned his head toward the old stone well, then toward the sagging back steps, as if measuring a scent Ethan could not begin to understand. Ethan slipped the key into his jacket pocket and walked to the rear of the cabin. The loose stone was still there beneath the crooked step, exactly where Margaret Hale had said it would be, exactly where his father had hidden the spare key when Ethan and Noah were boys. He knelt, lifted the stone, and found a second key beneath it, blackened with age but dry inside a folded square of wax paper. That small care broke something open in him. Noah had kept the old hiding place. Not because he needed it, perhaps, but because some part of him still believed Ethan might come back and remember where to look. The door resisted at first, swollen by years of weather, then gave way with a tired wooden groan. The smell inside was immediate and deep: damp pine boards, cold ashes, mouse-chewed paper, old smoke, and the faint cedar scent of trunks that had not been opened in years. Ethan stood in the doorway with Briggs beside him now, both of them looking into the dim room where daylight entered in thin stripes through broken blinds. The cabin was worse up close. A brown stain spread across the ceiling near the stovepipe. The kitchen counter had warped. One chair lay on its side. A braided rug curled at the edges like a dried leaf. But nothing had been scattered carelessly. Even in decay, the room held order. Firewood was stacked beside the iron stove. A tin coffee pot sat clean on the shelf. The table had been wiped, though dust had returned. On it lay a single envelope with Ethan's name written in Noah's familiar block letters. Ethan did not touch it right away. He stepped inside as though entering a church after the service had ended. Briggs moved slowly through the room, sniffing corners, pausing at the stove, then the floorboards near the kitchen, then the hallway leading to the small back bedroom. His claws clicked softly on the wood. Ethan's eyes went to the mantel. There was a photograph there in a cracked frame. Two boys stood by Black Hollow Creek holding a crooked stringer of sunfish, one tall and proud, the other grinning with mud on his cheek. Noah had one arm slung around Ethan's shoulders. Their father's shadow stretched across the creek bank at their feet, long and protective in the afternoon light. Ethan picked up the photograph. Dust came away on his thumb. He remembered that day with painful clarity. Noah pretending the smallest fish was a lake monster, Ethan laughing so hard he dropped the bait tin, their father telling them that brothers did not have to agree on every trail as long as they knew how to find each other before dark. Ethan set the frame back carefully. The envelope waited on the table. Finally, he opened it. Inside was a short letter, written by a hand that looked steady at first but grew uneven near the end. Ethan, if you are standing here, then you came farther than I feared you would and later than I hoped. I kept it standing as long as I could. The roof is tired, the porch is stubborn, and the stove still smokes if the wind comes from the east. You will probably think I left you a burden. Maybe I did. But some burdens are only doors that have not opened yet. Ethan paused, feeling the cabin settle around him. Briggs had gone still by the kitchen floor, staring toward the iron stove. Ethan continued reading. I tried to write you more times than I can count. Sometimes I got angry. Sometimes I got proud. Mostly I got scared that if you came back, I would not know how to say I missed you without making it sound like blame. If you cannot forgive me, I understand. But do not leave before Briggs has had a chance to listen. He always knew where you were before anyone said your name. Ethan lowered the letter. His breath felt caught somewhere behind his ribs. Briggs has had a chance to listen. The words seemed to move through the room like a draft under a closed door. The German shepherd lifted one paw and placed it on the floorboard beside the stove. Once. Twice. 3 times. Not digging yet. Not scratching. Tapping. Ethan crossed the room and knelt beside him. The board under Briggs's paw looked no different from the others, only darker near the seam where years of ash and boot dust had gathered. Ethan pressed it. It did not move. Briggs sniffed, then turned sharply toward the back door, trotted outside, and headed straight for the white oak behind the cabin. Ethan followed into the mist. The ground around the tree was soft with rain, layered with wet leaves and acorns. Briggs circled once, then stopped between 2 thick roots where the earth dipped slightly. His ears stood rigid. His nose touched the soil. Then, with sudden purpose, he began to dig. Ethan watched for a moment, the letter still in his hand, as dark earth flew gently from beneath the dog's paws. He should have called him off. He should have gone back inside, assessed the roof, made a list, thought like a practical man. But the cabin had already begun speaking in the only language it had left: old wood, hidden keys, a brother's letter, and a dog determined to uncover what grief had buried. Briggs dug with a careful urgency that made Ethan forget the cold mist gathering along his collar. The German shepherd was not tearing at the earth wildly, not chasing some animal scent or playing at a habit. He worked in a tight circle between the roots of the white oak, pausing every few seconds to press his nose to the soil, then digging again with steady, deliberate strokes. Wet leaves slid aside. Dark earth loosened. Fine roots appeared like thin brown threads. Ethan set Noah's letter on a flat stone beneath the tree, rolled up his sleeves under the worn olive field jacket, and knelt beside the dog. His knees sank into the mud, and the dampness came through his jeans at once, but he barely noticed. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though he knew Briggs was already being careful. The dog stopped suddenly and looked at him. Not back toward the cabin. Not toward the woods. Directly at him, amber eyes bright with purpose. Ethan reached into the hole with both hands and scraped away the soft soil. His fingers struck something hard, flat, and cold. For a heartbeat he did not move. The sound of rain dripping from the oak branches seemed to grow louder around him. He cleared more dirt, and uncovered the corner of a metal box wrapped in blackened oilcloth. It was about the size of a lunch pail, sealed tight, with a small brass latch greened at the edges. Briggs sat back, mud clinging to his paws and muzzle, chest rising and falling in quiet satisfaction. Ethan lifted the box from the ground. It was heavier than he expected. Not gold heavy. Memory heavy. The kind of weight that seemed to come from all the years it had waited beneath the roots. He carried it to the porch, where the roof still kept off most of the mist, and set it on the top step. His hands left brown prints on the oilcloth as he unwrapped it. The box beneath was old steel, carefully taped along the seams. Noah had always been careful with things he wanted to last. Ethan found a flathead screwdriver in the truck and eased the latch open. The lid gave a small pop as the seal broke, releasing the dry scent of cedar shavings and paper. Inside lay 3 objects arranged with almost ceremonial care. The first was their father's compass, brass-cased, scratched along one side where Ethan had dropped it on a rock when he was 11. The second was a photograph of Ethan and Noah at 12 and 15, standing beneath the same white oak in summer sunlight, both boys barefoot, both holding fishing poles, both smiling as if the world had not yet learned how to separate them. The third was a roll of paper tied with faded red string. Ethan touched the compass first. It was cold at the center of his palm, but the needle still moved, trembling before settling north. His father had carried it on every hunting trip, every hike, every walk through the ridge after supper. He used to say a compass did not tell a man where to go. It only told him which way was true. Ethan opened the photograph and felt time tilt beneath him. Noah's grin was wide, reckless, full of summer. Ethan's own younger face looked up at his brother with the unguarded trust of a boy who had not yet learned that love could be left unanswered for a decade and still hurt like yesterday. Briggs leaned close and sniffed the photo gently, then looked toward the cabin. Ethan untied the red string. The paper was not a letter at first glance. It was a hand-drawn map of the cabin and yard, marked with small symbols: the oak, the well, the stove, the back step, the creek path, and a square beneath the kitchen floor. On the bottom, Noah had written in his block letters, "If Briggs found this, then you stayed long enough to listen." Ethan read the line again, and the words landed deeper the second time. He had come to inspect a burden. Briggs had come to uncover a message. The difference felt like grace. On the back of the map was a note, shorter than the first but more intimate, as if Noah had written it at the kitchen table while the cabin groaned around him. Dad always said this ridge had 2 hearts. One above ground, where people could see the smoke, and one below, where things were kept safe when winter got mean. I did not understand him until the first year the county shelter closed early and old Mr. Larkin nearly froze in his truck by the creek. After that, I stopped thinking of this place as ours. I started thinking of it as something we were supposed to keep for others. Ethan sat on the porch step, the paper resting across his knees. He remembered Mr. Larkin, a thin man with silver hair who repaired radios and always smelled faintly of peppermint. He remembered Noah helping him carry firewood one winter, remembered being annoyed because it meant their fishing trip started late. He had forgotten the kindness. Noah had not. Briggs stepped down from the porch and walked to the cabin door, leaving muddy paw prints on the old boards. He paused at the threshold and looked back. Ethan folded the map carefully and followed him inside. The room seemed different now, though nothing had changed. The sagging roof, the warped counter, the crooked chair, the cold iron stove, all of it felt less like decay and more like a disguise. Briggs went straight to the kitchen floor beside the stove, where he had tapped earlier. This time he lowered his nose to the dark seam and gave 2 slow scratches with one paw. Ethan knelt and studied the boards. There was a square outline hidden beneath years of ash and dust, so faint he would have missed it if the dog had not shown him where to look. He ran his fingers along the edge and found a narrow gap. The house creaked in the wind, and from somewhere below came a soft hollow sound, not loud, not frightening, only waiting. Ethan took the screwdriver, slipped it into the seam, and lifted. The board rose with a low sigh, and beneath it was not rotten earth, but a fitted stone slab with an iron ring set flush into the center. Briggs stood over it, ears forward, tail still. Ethan stared at the ring, then at the map in his hand. His brother had not left him a broken cabin. Noah had left him a question, and for the first time in years, Ethan was brave enough to answer it. Ethan wrapped both hands around the iron ring and pulled. At first, nothing moved. The stone seemed fused to the cabin itself, sealed by years of dust, cold, and silence. Briggs stood beside him, close enough that Ethan could feel the dog's steady warmth against his shoulder. The old floorboards creaked softly under their weight, and a thin draft rose from the seam around the slab, carrying the scent of stone, cedar, and air that had not touched daylight in a long time. Ethan shifted his boots, planted his feet, and pulled again, slower this time, using patience instead of force. The slab gave a faint scrape. Then another. Inch by inch, it lifted, revealing a dark square beneath the kitchen floor and a narrow set of wooden steps descending into the foundation. Ethan sat back on his heels, breathing hard, not from the effort alone but from the strangeness of finding strength in a house everyone else would have condemned. Briggs lowered his head toward the opening and sniffed. His ears moved, first forward, then slightly outward, catching small sounds Ethan could not hear. There was no panic in him. Only recognition. Ethan clipped a flashlight to Briggs's harness, then took another from his truck and held it low as he started down the stairs. The wood beneath his boots was dry and firm. That surprised him. Above them, the cabin sagged and leaked and groaned with every shift of wind, but below, the structure felt carefully tended. Fresh braces supported the joists. Stone walls had been sealed with clean mortar. A narrow drainage channel ran along one side, dry except for a silver thread of water moving quietly toward a covered pipe. Ethan paused halfway down and touched one of the beams. The lumber was not old. Someone had replaced it within the last few years. Noah had not been simply living in a broken cabin. He had been protecting the part of it nobody saw. At the bottom of the stairs, the space opened into a low basement room lit only by the 2 flashlights. The air was cool but clean. Shelves lined the walls in careful rows. On them were folded blankets sealed in plastic bags, canned soup, first aid kits, wool socks, batteries, hand warmers, lanterns, dog food, and stacks of paper cups. A workbench stood against the far wall, covered with neatly labeled tools. Beside it sat a small generator, silent but maintained, its fuel line capped, its metal casing wiped free of rust. Ethan turned in place slowly, the flashlight beam trembling across the room. This was not storage. This was preparation. Briggs walked to the center of the basement, and sat beside a wooden table where a large ledger lay beneath a clean cloth. Ethan lifted the cloth. The ledger's cover was dark green, worn at the corners, with one word written across it in Noah's block letters: Winter. Ethan opened it. The first page listed names, dates, and short notes. Harold Larkin, January 17th, stayed 2 nights, truck repaired, sent home with blankets. Maribel James, February 3rd, water line frozen, delivered heater and canned goods. 2 travelers from Route 6, March 10th, given fuel, food, and directions to county shelter. Ethan turned page after page. Some entries were only practical. Some carried small tenderness. Left extra coffee for Mr. Doyle. Replaced Mrs. Bell's porch bulb. Took soup to the veteran in the gray van. Dog liked him. Ethan stopped at that line. He could see Noah writing it, maybe smiling to himself in the quiet after midnight. The room blurred slightly, and Ethan pressed the heel of his hand to one eye. Not because he was ashamed of the feeling, but because it had arrived too quickly to stand upright under. Briggs came close and nudged his wrist. Ethan rested his hand on the dog's head. He was doing this alone, he whispered. The words sounded small in the basement, but the truth of them filled every shelf. On the wall above the workbench hung an old framed map of Black Hollow Ridge. Lines had been drawn from the cabin to the creek, the well, 3 farmhouses, an abandoned schoolhouse, and a cluster of trailers near the county road. Beside the map, written in black marker on a pine board, were the words, "No one should freeze within walking distance of home." Ethan read them once, then again. He thought of the rest area outside Scranton, of the cold glass, the paper cup of coffee, the way he had folded himself inside the truck and tried to convince his body that it was enough. He had been within walking distance of many towns. Rarely had he felt within walking distance of home. A soft ticking came from beyond the far wall. Briggs turned toward it immediately. Ethan followed the sound with his flashlight and found a narrow door half hidden behind stacked crates. The door had no knob, only a rope loop threaded through a drilled hole. He pulled it gently. Behind it was a small pump room built around a stone-lined shaft where clear water moved below, dark and quiet. Pipes ran from the shaft through a filtration system mounted to the wall, each valve labeled in Noah's handwriting. Emergency well. Community line. Cabin sink. Ridge tap. Ethan stared at the setup, understanding arriving in pieces. The cabin's greatest secret was not under the tree or beneath the stove. It was under the ridge itself. Water. Clean water. Protected water. A resource Noah had guarded while the town above dismissed him as a stubborn man living in a ruin. Briggs stepped to the edge of the pump room and sniffed the air, then looked back at Ethan as if asking whether he finally understood why the digging had mattered. Ethan did. The broken cabin had a second heart, and that heart was still beating beneath the floor. Ethan stayed in the pump room longer than he meant to, listening to the quiet movement of water beneath the stone shaft, while Briggs stood beside him with his ears forward and his black and tan coat glowing softly in the flashlight beam. The sound was not loud. It was almost hidden, a low underground murmur, steady as breath, patient as prayer. In all the years Ethan had been gone, sleeping in truck stops, working short jobs, eating meals wherever kindness happened to appear, Noah had been here beneath the broken floorboards keeping water clean for people who might never know his name. Ethan ran his hand along the pipes, reading the labels in his brother's handwriting. Emergency well. Community line. Cabin sink. Ridge tap. Each word was practical, but together they felt like a confession. Noah had not written poems. He had built them out of valves, blankets, ledgers, and winter supplies. Briggs nudged a crate near the doorway with his nose, drawing Ethan back from the pump. The crate was marked Outreach, and inside were envelopes arranged by year. Ethan opened the newest one first. The papers smelled faintly of cedar and machine oil. There were receipts for replacement filters, notes from families on the ridge, winter route maps, and several letters from Margaret Hale. One letter, dated only 6 months earlier, was written in her neat hand. Noah, Russell Pike came by my office again asking about mineral access, water rights, and whether you had any living relatives willing to sell. I told him the land was not available. Be careful. Some people see a spring and think only of profit. Some see it and remember thirst. Ethan felt the temperature of the room seem to drop. He read the letter again, slower. Russell Pike. The name stirred an old memory. A boy from town grown into a man with heavy boots, a loud truck, and a talent for making every conversation feel like a bargain already decided. Ethan remembered seeing Pike construction signs on the way through Black Hollow that morning, bright red lettering nailed to half the fences near the county road. He had not thought anything of it then. Now the name seemed to echo through the basement like a boot step above hollow ground. Briggs gave a low rumble. Not toward the pump room. Toward the ceiling. Ethan looked up. Faintly, through the cabin floor, came the crunch of tires on gravel. He switched off one flashlight. The basement dimmed. Briggs moved to the stairs without a sound, every line of him alert. Ethan gathered the letters, the ledger, and the map, placing them carefully inside a dry storage box before following the dog upward. By the time he reached the kitchen, daylight had shifted toward late afternoon, gray and soft through the dirty windows. A white pickup truck sat outside near the oak, clean enough to look wrong in that muddy yard. Its doors bore the red letters Ethan had noticed earlier, Pike Construction. A man stood on the porch without knocking, broad in the shoulders, wearing a wax-brown jacket, new work boots, and a smile that belonged more to business than welcome. He was in his late 50s, with silver hair combed straight back and a face weathered by sun more than hardship. Ethan Calloway, he called through the partly open door. Russell Pike. Sorry about your brother. Good man. Stubborn as a fence post, but good. Ethan stepped into view with Briggs at his side. The German shepherd did not bark. He simply stood there, dark harness still clipped around his chest, amber eyes fixed on Russell's hands. Can I help you? Ethan asked. Russell glanced past him into the cabin, his eyes moving quickly over the warped counter, the tired stove, the lifted floorboard Ethan had not yet replaced. Too quickly. I heard you were back, Russell said. Figured I would save you some trouble. Place is in bad shape. County already marked it unfit last year. You are looking at roof work, foundation work, well inspection, permits, maybe mold cleanup. That is a lot for a man just passing through. Ethan said nothing. Silence had always made men like Russell fill the room with more of themselves. Russell reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. I made Noah an offer. Fair offer. He would not take it. Maybe you are more practical. I can give you cash by Monday. Enough to get back on your feet, find an apartment, get that truck fixed. Briggs shifted one paw, placing himself slightly ahead of Ethan. Russell's eyes dropped to the dog, then flicked toward the white oak. It was subtle, but Ethan saw it. Not curiosity. Concern. The hole beneath the roots had been covered loosely, but the earth was still dark and fresh. Ethan felt the letters in his jacket pocket like a second heartbeat. What do you want with a cabin you just said is nearly worthless? He asked. Russell laughed softly. Land is land. I can clear it, make something useful. Useful for who? The smile thinned. For people with plans. Ethan looked past him to the ridge, where mist moved between the trees and the hidden water ran quietly under stone. Noah had had plans too. Only Noah's plans had included old men in cold trucks, women with frozen water lines, travelers who needed soup, and people who had forgotten what it felt like to be expected. Russell stepped closer to the threshold. Briggs gave one low, steady sound from deep in his chest. Not a threat. A boundary. Russell stopped. Ethan placed one hand lightly on the dog's harness. The cabin is not for sale, he said. Russell studied him for a long moment, and the friendliness drained from his face just enough to show the calculation underneath. You may want to speak with Margaret before you decide that. There are responsibilities tied to this land. Taxes. Access rules. Water regulations. A man without a permanent address might find ownership more complicated than grief makes it look. Ethan felt the words land exactly where Russell intended them to land, on the old bruise of not belonging anywhere. But this time, the cabin did not let them sink in alone. The floor beneath his boots held firm. Briggs leaned against his leg. Somewhere below, the hidden water kept moving. I will speak with Margaret, Ethan said. But not because you told me to. Russell folded the envelope slowly and tucked it back into his jacket. Suit yourself? He stepped off the porch, boots darkening in the mud, and walked toward his truck. Before climbing in, he looked once more at the white oak, then at the cabin roof, then at Ethan. It was the look of a man who had expected rot and found a locked door instead. When the truck finally pulled away, Ethan stood in the doorway until the sound disappeared down the rutted lane. Briggs remained beside him, ears still lifted, eyes on the trees. Ethan turned back toward the kitchen, toward the open floor and the basement below. Noah had left him more than shelter. He had left him a fight that would not need fists, only truth, patience, and the courage to keep a broken place from falling into the wrong hands. That evening, Ethan drove into Black Hollow with Briggs sitting upright in the passenger seat, his black and tan coat still marked with dried mud from the oak roots and his amber eyes watching the road as if the trees themselves might speak again. The town looked smaller than Ethan remembered. The same two-block main street sat between the hardware store and the post office, the same church bell rose above the maples, and the same cracked sidewalk ran past buildings whose paint had faded but not surrendered. Pike construction signs stood in 3 different lots, bright red against the gray afternoon, too new and too bold for a place that had always preferred quiet colors. Margaret Hale's law office occupied the 2nd floor above an old pharmacy, its windows glowing warm against the coming dusk. She was waiting when Ethan climbed the stairs, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair pinned at the back of her head, clear blue eyes, and a cardigan the color of winter wheat. Her office smelled of paper, peppermint tea, and raincoats drying near a radiator. She did not seem surprised when Briggs entered beside Ethan, only nodded to the dog as if he had every right to be there. "Noah said he would find the first box before sundown," she said softly. Ethan stopped with one hand still on the doorknob. "You knew?" Margaret folded her hands on the desk. "I knew there was a box. I did not know where. Noah believed instructions should be earned by attention, not handed over to whoever arrived with a claim." Ethan sat slowly, feeling the old floorboards of the office hold his weight. Briggs settled at his feet but did not sleep. Ethan placed the ledger, the map, Margaret's old letter, and the papers from the outreach crate on the desk. For a moment Margaret only looked at them. Then her expression changed, not with surprise, but with grief finally allowed to show itself. "He kept better records than most foundations," she whispered. "He kept everything," Ethan said. "Except himself out of trouble." A faint smile touched her face, then faded. Margaret opened a drawer and removed a thick folder tied with a navy ribbon. "Noah came to me 4 years ago when Russell Pike began asking questions about the ridge. At first it was timber access. Then easements. Then water rights. By the time Russell realized your father's old spring fed more than just the cabin well, Noah had already filed protections." She untied the ribbon and spread the documents across the desk. Deeds. Survey maps. Conservation easement papers. A charitable use agreement. Ethan read what he could, but legal language moved like fog unless someone kind lit a lantern through it. Margaret became that lantern. She explained that the land belonged fully to Ethan now, but Noah had attached it to a protected community trust. The cabin could be repaired, lived in, and used as a winter refuge. The water system could serve nearby residents during emergencies. But the land could not be sold to a private developer without breaking conditions that would send the property into county guardianship for public service. "He did not trap you," Margaret said gently, seeing Ethan's face tighten. "He protected you from being pressured into selling before you understood what you had." Ethan looked down at Briggs, who had lifted his head at the word selling. "Russell came by today," Ethan said. Margaret's eyes sharpened. "I expected he would. He made it sound like I could not handle the responsibility. That is how men like Russell buy what people would never give them freely. First they make the burden feel heavier than the purpose." Ethan sat back. Outside the window, Main Street lamps flickered on one by one, halos forming in the mist. The town moved below them in small, ordinary ways, a woman crossing with groceries, a pickup easing past the pharmacy, someone sweeping water from a storefront step. It struck Ethan that all of them lived close enough to the ridge to be touched by what Noah had guarded, yet most had never known the name of the hand beneath the floor keeping the water clean. Margaret reached for one more envelope. This one was sealed with plain tape and bore Ethan's name. "Noah asked me to give you this only after you found the basement." Ethan took it carefully. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten note. "If I am gone before we fix what broke between us, play this where the stove can hear it. It knows more of our family than either of us ever admitted." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. The office was warm, but the note carried him back to the cabin kitchen, the iron stove, the smell of ashes, the board Briggs had found. "He left a recording?" Margaret nodded. "Made it in the last week. He was tired but clear." Ethan folded the note and placed it in his pocket. He wanted to ask why Noah had not called, why he had hidden tenderness behind maps and legal clauses, why brothers could build whole walls out of silence and still leave keys under the same stone. But Margaret could not answer questions meant for the dead. She could only hand over what love had managed to leave behind. Before Ethan stood, she leaned forward. "Russell may try to scare you with inspections, taxes, repair estimates, public opinion. Let him make noise. You have documents. You have time. And if I may say so, you have the first steady thing this cabin has had since Noah got sick." Ethan looked at her. "What is that?" Her eyes moved to Briggs, then back to him. "Someone willing to stay." The words followed Ethan back down the stairs, through the misty town, and along the darkening road to Black Hollow Ridge. By the time the cabin appeared between the trees, one small star had opened above the ridge line. Ethan parked beside the oak. Briggs jumped down and waited at the back step. Inside, the cabin was colder than before, but not empty. Ethan set the flash drive beside the old iron stove, cleared dust from a small battery-powered screen Noah had stored in the basement, and sat on the floor with Briggs pressed against his side. When the recording began, Noah appeared in a wooden chair by the same stove, thinner than Ethan remembered, his hair gray at the temples, his eyes tired but gentle. For a few seconds he said nothing. Then he smiled sadly. "Hey, little brother," Noah said. "If Briggs dug up the first box, then I guess you finally came home long enough for the ground to tell on me." Ethan let out a breath that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. Briggs rested his head on Ethan's knee. On the screen, Noah looked toward the stove, then back again. "I need you to know something before anyone else tries to tell you what this place is worth. The cabin is not the gift. It is only the shell. What is underneath it, and what you choose to do with it, that is where the real inheritance begins." Noah's recorded voice filled the cabin with a warmth the stove had not yet learned to give back. The little screen flickered on the crate in front of Ethan, casting soft light across the worn floorboards, the lifted panel near the stove, and Briggs's calm face resting against Ethan's knee. Outside, night settled over Black Hollow Ridge in layers of blue and black, and rainwater slipped from the roof in slow drops that tapped the porch boards like a quiet clock. Noah looked thinner on the recording than Ethan wanted him to look, but his eyes were still familiar, still carrying that older brother steadiness Ethan had once trusted without question. "I used to think fixing the cabin meant fixing us," Noah said, glancing down at his hands. "Every board I replaced, every pipe I sealed, every winter box I packed, I told myself maybe one day you would come back and see that I had kept something alive. Then I realized I had been asking wood to say what I was too proud to say." Ethan lowered his head. Briggs shifted closer, the dark harness brushing against Ethan's sleeve. On the screen, Noah smiled faintly. "I was angry when you stopped calling. I told myself you did not care. That was easier than admitting I did not know how to reach a man who had come home carrying weather none of us could see. I thought silence meant rejection. Maybe it meant pain. Maybe it meant you were trying not to pull anyone else into the storm." Ethan closed his eyes, and for a moment he was back on a winter roadside years earlier, phone in hand, Noah's name glowing on the screen while Ethan sat in the dark unable to answer because he did not know how to sound like the brother Noah remembered. He had let the call fade. Then another. Then enough time passed that silence became its own country, hard to cross and easy to defend. "I should have come looking," Noah said. "I am sorry I did not." The words landed softly, but they opened something Ethan had braced shut for years. Not all wounds needed thunder to hurt. Some were only a chair left empty too long, a letter never mailed, a road home taken off the map by shame. Noah leaned closer to the camera. "There is more under the cabin than the well. Behind the pump room, there is a cedar cabinet. The key is taped under the workbench, left side, where Dad used to hide the good fishing hooks. Inside are the records Margaret needs, the water test results, the letters from the Ridge families, and one thing I saved for you. You will know it when you see it." Briggs lifted his head before Ethan moved, as if the dog understood the instruction and had no patience for delay. Ethan paused the recording. The sudden silence felt full, not empty. He took the flashlight and descended the stairs beneath the kitchen floor, Briggs leading with sure steps. The basement seemed different at night. The shelves of blankets and supplies sat in neat rows, the ledger waited under its cloth, and the pump room murmured with hidden water. Ethan found the workbench and ran his fingers along the underside of the left edge. Tape brushed his skin. He pulled free a small brass key, tarnished but clean. Briggs stood beside the pump room door, nose pointed toward the far wall. Behind stacked filter boxes was a cedar cabinet Ethan had missed earlier, built into the stone so carefully it looked like part of the foundation. The key turned with a soft click. Inside were folders, water reports, letters, and an old canvas pouch. Ethan opened the pouch last. In it lay a wooden compass case, hand-carved with two initials, E and N. He remembered carving those letters with Noah one July afternoon when they were boys, both of them arguing over whether the letters should be crooked because crooked things had more character. Inside the case was their father's compass, not the brass one from the box under the oak, but the older one, the one their father had called the home compass. Its needle had stuck years ago, always pointing slightly west toward the cabin no matter where they carried it. Their father used to joke that some compasses did not care about north. They only cared about where a man belonged. Ethan held it in both hands. The needle trembled once, then settled toward the stone wall behind him, toward the pump, the well, the ridge, the hidden heart of the place. Briggs gave a soft whine. Ethan found another note beneath the compass case. Little brother, if you are holding this, I hope you understand. I did not leave the cabin because it was easy. I left it because you know broken things can still carry weight. You know how to shore up what others abandon. You know what it feels like to be cold within walking distance of help. That makes you the right man, not the last choice. Ethan sat on the basement floor, the compass in his hands, and let the truth come without fighting it. Noah had not pitied him. Noah had seen him. Above them, a vehicle rolled slowly onto the gravel outside. Briggs stood instantly, ears high. Ethan heard a door close, then another, and Russell Pike's voice carried faintly through the floorboards, smooth and unwelcome in the dark. Ethan? Thought we should talk before this gets complicated. Briggs moved to the stairs and stopped, looking back. Ethan placed the compass in his jacket pocket beside Noah's note. The cabin no longer felt like a ruin around him. It felt like a witness. He climbed the stairs with the dog at his side, not angry, not afraid, but steadier than he had been in years. Some inheritances arrive as money. Some arrive as land. And some wait beneath the floor until a man finally believes he is worthy of standing on it. Ethan reached the kitchen just as Russell Pike stepped onto the porch, his shape darkened by the yellow glow of the old truck lights behind him. Two other men stood near the edge of the yard, not close enough to seem openly threatening, not far enough to be accidental. One held a clipboard under his coat. The other kept his hands in his pockets, and looked toward the white oak too often. Night had settled thick around the cabin, and the mist rising from the ridge made the headlights look like pale tunnels cut through fog. Briggs stood beside Ethan with his shoulders squared, his black and tan coat still marked with the day's mud, his upright ears fixed on the voices outside, his dark working harness catching a thin line of lamplight from the kitchen. He did not bark. He did not need to. The whole cabin seemed to understand the boundary he made. Russell lifted one hand in a friendly gesture that felt practiced. Late visit, I know, he called through the open doorway. But I figured we could settle this before lawyers make a simple thing expensive. Ethan rested his hand lightly on the back of a kitchen chair. The lifted floorboard near the stove had been set loosely back into place, and beneath it the basement held Noah's ledgers, water records, and all the quiet proof of what the ridge had been protecting. There is nothing to settle tonight, Ethan said. Russell smiled with only half his mouth. That is where you are mistaken. I spoke with a county contact. This place is not up to code. Roof sagging, porch unstable, old well system, unpermitted modifications. You start making claims about community use, and you invite inspections. Fines. Liability. You do not want that kind of attention. The word liability hung in the damp air like a hook. Ethan had heard men use language that way before, polishing fear until it sounded like advice. Briggs gave a low breath, and Ethan felt it steady him. Noah filed the protections, Ethan said. Margaret has the documents. Russell's eyes narrowed. Not much, but enough. Margaret is sentimental. She is not the one who will pay when the county starts asking how a man without a stable income plans to manage a protected water source. One of the men by the yard shifted his weight. The clipboard tilted. Ethan saw the Red Pike Construction logo on the folder tucked beneath the man's arm. They had not come to talk. They had come to make the cabin feel smaller than their paperwork. For a moment, the old shame tried to rise in Ethan, that cold, familiar voice that reminded him of every form asking for a permanent address, every job that wanted a clean story, every office chair where he had sat feeling like a problem instead of a person. Then, from beneath the floor, the pump gave a soft click and the hidden water moved through the pipes with a faint, steady murmur. The sound was barely there, but Ethan heard it. So did Briggs. The German shepherd's ears turned toward the stove, then back to Russell. The cabin was answering in its own language. Ethan stepped onto the porch, closing the door halfway behind him so the warm light stayed at his back. "You asked what I planned to do," he said. "I planned to repair the roof. I planned to bring the porch up to code. I planned to keep the water system protected. And I planned to use the cabin exactly the way Noah intended." Russell chuckled softly. "Intentions do not pay contractors." "No," Ethan said. "But the trust does." That made the man with the clipboard look up. Russell's smile faded further. Ethan removed the folded papers from inside his jacket, not handing them over, only letting Russell see the county stamp, Margaret's notarized cover sheet, and the conservation filing number. Margaret explained it. "Noah did not leave me a trap. He left me instructions." Russell stared at the papers, and for the first time his confidence seemed to search for somewhere to stand. Before he could speak, headlights appeared down the lane. Another vehicle rolled slowly toward the cabin, smaller than Russell's truck, its tires careful in the mud. Margaret Hale stepped out with a flashlight in one hand and a wool coat pulled tight around her shoulders. Behind her came Sheriff Alan Mercer, a broad, gray-haired man Ethan dimly remembered from childhood, older now but carrying the same quiet patience. No one hurried. No one raised a voice. Yet the yard changed the moment they arrived. It became less Russell's stage and more the truth's. Margaret walked to the porch and looked at Ethan first. "I thought you might have company." Then she turned to Russell. "You were told in writing not to approach this property regarding purchase or access without going through my office." Russell spread his hands. "Margaret, I was only offering help." Sheriff Mercer glanced toward the clipboard, the two men, and the construction truck blocking half the lane. "Looks like a lot of help for this hour." The men near the yard looked away. Briggs stepped forward beside Ethan, calm and watchful. The sheriff noticed him and gave a small nod, the kind reserved for working dogs and old soldiers who did not need introductions. Margaret opened her briefcase on the hood of her car and pulled out copies of the filings. Her voice remained gentle, but every word had a locked edge. "Noah Calloway's property is protected. The spring, the well system, and the cabin are tied to a charitable use agreement. Ethan is the lawful owner and designated steward. Any attempt to pressure him into selling, misrepresent county authority, or interfere with the water system will be documented." Russell's face tightened. "You are making this dramatic." "No," Margaret said. "Noah made it legal." The night went very still after that. A drop of water fell from the porch roof into a metal bucket below, ringing softly. Russell looked at Ethan, and beneath the frustration there was something else now, the recognition that the homeless man he expected to frighten had not come alone. He had come with a brother's records, an attorney's promise, a sheriff's witness, a dog's instinct, and a cabin full of names. Russell folded his clipboard shut. "This is not over." Ethan looked at him with no anger in his face. "Maybe not. But it is no longer hidden." One by one, Russell and his men returned to their vehicles. Their headlights swung through the trees and disappeared down the ridge road, leaving only darkness, wet leaves, and the faint smell of exhaust fading into pine. Margaret stood beside Ethan for a while without speaking. Sheriff Mercer walked the edge of the porch, inspecting the sagging boards with practical eyes. "Roof will need work before hard snow," he said. "But the bones are better than they look." Ethan almost smiled. "That seems to be a theme." Briggs lowered himself onto the porch near Ethan's boots, but his eyes remained on the lane until the last engine sound was gone. Margaret touched the doorframe gently, as if greeting an old friend. "Your brother believed this place would reopen," she said. Ethan looked back through the doorway at the iron stove, the patch table, the floor that hid a second heart, and the shadows that no longer felt empty. "Then I guess we had better get started," he said. And under the cabin, quiet as grace beneath stone, the water kept moving. By morning, Black Hollow Ridge looked less like a place forgotten and more like a place waiting to be forgiven. The storm had moved east before dawn, leaving the sky washed pale and clean above the hemlocks, and thin sunlight slid across the wet roof of the cabin in long, golden strips. Ethan woke on the kitchen floor beneath two old quilts from the basement, with Briggs stretched beside him, the German shepherd's black and tan coat warm against his arm and his dark working harness folded neatly near the stove. For the first time in months, Ethan had not slept like a man ready to leave before sunrise. He had slept deeply, heavily, as if the floor beneath him had finally stopped asking for proof that he belonged. Margaret returned after breakfast with coffee, county forms, and a list of local contractors Noah had trusted. Sheriff Mercer came by with a thermos and a quiet promise to keep an eye on the Ridge Road. By noon, two neighbors arrived with gloves and a ladder. One was Mrs. Bell, whose porch bulb Noah had replaced years earlier. The other was Paul Doyle, a retired mail carrier who remembered Ethan as the boy who once caught a turtle in Black Hollow Creek and tried to keep it in a washtub. Neither asked where Ethan had been. Neither made his homelessness a question in need of public handling. They simply stood in the muddy yard, looked at the sagging roof, and began talking about what could be fixed before the first hard snow. That kindness almost undid him more than Russell's pressure had. Shame knew what to do with judgment. It had armor for that. But simple welcome had a way of finding the unguarded places. Over the next several weeks, the cabin changed by inches, then by rooms. Rotten porch boards were lifted and replaced. The roof was patched, then reinforced. The cracked window beside the front door received new glass. The old iron stove was cleaned until it gave back heat without filling the room with smoke. Downstairs, the basement shelves were organized, the pump system inspected, the filters replaced, and the emergency ridge tap tested under Margaret's careful paperwork and Sheriff Mercer's witness. The county inspector, a soft-spoken woman with a clipboard and muddy boots, admitted that Noah had built the lower structure better than most permitted shelters she had seen. "The top looks tired," she told Ethan, running a hand over one of the new braces. "But the bones are honest." Ethan thought of what the sheriff had said and smiled for the first time without feeling surprised by it. Briggs became the cabin's unofficial foreman. He followed every ladder, sniffed every box, and placed himself exactly where people seemed most likely to need patience. Children from a nearby family brought him biscuits. Mrs. Bell knitted him a red bandana he wore with solemn dignity for half a day before leaving it on Ethan's boot. Each evening, after the volunteers left and the ridge settled into blue silence, Ethan played a little more of Noah's recording. Some parts made him laugh quietly. Some parts made him sit still for a long time. Noah had left instructions for the water system, notes about the best firewood stack, names of people who might need checking on when temperatures dropped below 20 degrees, and one final request. "Hang Dad's home compass by the door," he said on the screen, "because everyone who walks in should know this place does not care where they have been. It only cares that they found their way here." By the first week of December, smoke rose from the chimney in a clean gray ribbon. A hand-painted sign hung near the porch, simple and unpolished: Ridge House, warm meals, clean water, safe rest. Ethan had not wanted his name on it. Margaret said Noah would have approved. The first person to arrive was Paul Doyle's nephew, a quiet veteran from Ohio whose van had broken down near Route 6. He came with 2 duffel bags, a tired face, and an old Labrador with cloudy eyes. Ethan met him at the porch, Briggs standing beside him, not as a guard now, but as a welcome. "You can stay tonight," Ethan said. "Longer if you need to." The man looked past him into the cabin, where the stove glowed, soup warmed on the counter, and clean blankets waited on the chair. His mouth tightened, and he nodded once, the way men sometimes do when gratitude is too large to speak without breaking. More came after that. An elderly woman whose pipes froze in a valley trailer. A young mother waiting for a repair on her car. a former nurse traveling between towns. A quiet man who fixed radios and left them working better than before. They did not call it charity. Ethan did not either. He called it what Noah had called it in the ledger: winter work. On Christmas Eve, snow began falling over Black Hollow Ridge, soft and steady, covering the repaired porch, the white oak, the old stone well, and the rutted lane that no longer looked abandoned. Inside, the cabin was full of low voices, warm light, and the smell of coffee, pine, and bread baking in the oven Mrs. Bell had insisted on bringing over. Ethan stood by the door and hung the home compass on a nail beneath Noah's first letter. The needle trembled, then settled slightly west, pointing not to true north, but to the cabin itself. Briggs sat below it, amber eyes half closed, his red bandana back around his neck because Mrs. Bell had won that argument. Ethan touched the compass case, feeling the carved initials beneath his thumb. E&N. Outside, the snow turned the ridge silver. Inside, the floor held steady above the hidden water. Ethan finally understood that his brother had not left him a ruin, or even a refuge. Noah had left him a way to become useful without disappearing, a way to belong without pretending he had never been lost. And sometimes, what looks broken is only waiting for the right hands, the right dog, and the right mercy to remember why it was built.